Our second reading is from the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, and it comes from the end of the book, chapter 21. Revelation is a long and difficult book that we rarely read from, and I'll get to that in a minute. But this chapter 21 is where John turns his attention fully to a description of the new heaven and the new earth. Hear now the word of the Lord. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, and they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of life." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In October 2017 in Bangkok, Thailand, a vision of heaven went up in a garden. It was constructed of 9 spires, a funeral pyre for King Bhumibol Adulyadej that would send his spirit into heaven. If you look at the pictures online, you will see a structure of metal that is put up piece by piece, made to be then taken down and built to represent Mount Meru, which is the center of the Hindu universe. As they built that temporary structure, it was intended to symbolize the highest of Thai architecture and art. The delicate towers were adorned with images from mythology and from the life of the king. He reigned for 70 years on the throne of Thailand and was deeply beloved. The main cremation tower was 165 feet tall, which makes it taller than the tallest building in Asheville. There was a 7-tiered roof and spire surrounded by 8 smaller pavilions. And at the 4 corners of the structure were small ponds, which symbolize the cosmic oceans that surround Mount Meru in Hindu mythology. Our reading this morning from the book of Revelation is the beginning of the Apostle John's vision of heaven. I can't remember the last time I preached from the book of Revelation. I'm not sure that I've ever preached from the book of Revelation on a Sunday morning in a service of the Lord's Day like this. I think I might have at a funeral. I'm sure that I've read these verses at a funeral. But when it comes to preaching from the book of Revelation, I just stay away from it. And I think it should probably have a label that says, "Handle with extreme caution." It seems to me that we can easily misinterpret a simple story out of Luke or a very explicit ethical instruction out of Romans. And if we can misinterpret that, I dare to shudder to think what we would do with the symbols and the images in Revelation. So I've stayed away from it. And you have seen, if you've stayed up late like I have, you've seen the charts and graphs on television late at night about how the world will end coming from the book of Revelation. And I see that, and that's not how I would interpret this book. And so I just have stayed away from it. And yet, I think the book of Revelation is very important to us because it fuels our vision of heaven. If Genesis tells us that we came from God, Revelation tells us that we're going to God. If Genesis tells us that God made the world in love, God made you and me and the turtles that hang out on the logs in the sunshine and the hawks that swirl overhead looking for food. If God made all of us, we learned that in Genesis, Revelation tells us that God so loves the world that all of this is going to return to God. That God is not going to abandon it. That means you and me and the black bears that look for food and the trout that swim in the stream. This whole beautiful creation will be perfected and returned to God. Revelation is a vision of the renewal of God's creation, a vision that we need to see as surely as the people in Thailand erected that structure of heaven. The broken is put together again, and the hurts are healed. There's nothing wrong in the world. And that happens, John the Revealer calls it a new heaven and a new earth. Except it's not entirely new. It's not made out of whole cloth. It looks a lot like the old heaven and the old earth, except put back together again, made right, fixed. Somewhere along the way, all of us will pick up a vision of heaven. What we believe the perfect life looks like for the world. We usually begin to pick this up very early, and then later in life, from our experiences and hopes and dreams, we begin to put together, what does perfection look like? I was asked to do a funeral several years ago of a person that was not a part of any religious community. The funeral home called me and asked if I would do it because they needed a minister, and I said I'd be happy to. So I showed up at the funeral home where the service was being held, and the family was standing to one side. The casket was down in the center, and it was open. Went by the family and said hello, introduced myself, and then I went by the casket to pay my respects. And inside the casket, there where the gentleman was laying, they had tucked a bottle of Jack Daniels right inside the crook of his arm. And in the other arm was a pack of Marlboros, and scattered throughout were small model NASCAR race cars. And I stood there wondering, what does this mean, right? So I went back and talked to the family. I said, tell me about this. What does this mean? And I said, well, Daddy loved NASCAR. He always smoked, and he liked to have a drink. And if it's going to be heaven for Daddy, he's going to have those things. So we thought we'd pack him some along the way. Said, okay. That's their vision of heaven. We all construct a vision of heaven at some point. What our slice of heaven looks like. For most of us, and for most of human history, our vision of heaven is rooted in nature. For most of us, it's more Genesis than Revelation. It's more the Garden of Eden. Except the snakes have been voted off the island. And all the animals kind of get along together, and the plants grow, and the weeds stay away, and there aren't many people. That's part of the vision of heaven. There aren't many people. If you were to hand me a sign that read "My Slice of Heaven" and ask me to hang it somewhere in this wide world, it would not be very far from crashing waves along a lightly populated beach. I don't know why that's my slice of heaven. It could be because some of my happiest memories of childhood are wandering a deserted beach near my home, picking up seashells and playing in the surf and calling my dog out of the dunes. Revelation does not describe a garden or a beach or even a quaint log cabin on a country road. When John the seer, the revealer of Revelation, describes heaven, he sees a city. Now that's going to be bad news for some of us. He sees a city, and it is teeming with people. It is crowded. And in this city, there in John's spirit-filled imagination, God is right in the midst of it all. John writes this: I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away. it's important to know here that John was writing to people who lived in a city. And so he is describing a vision of heaven that relates to their real world. He's not giving them a vision of escape, but he's giving them a vision of their world transformed. Now, scholars have debated about when Revelation might have been written, but what we are pretty sure is that Revelation was written decades after Christ's resurrection, and it was written in the context of the Roman Empire and to people who were very much either Roman citizens or living under Roman government. It was written against the backdrop of an empire that was built on military conquest and trade. And in that empire, the emperor was treated as God. So in the Roman Empire, there were a lot of religions that coexisted, and you could worship any god or many gods, however you chose, as long as you worshiped the emperor, because Caesar was considered God. Except for Christians from the beginning, that would not fly. Christians knew that when they said Jesus is Lord, they were also saying Caesar is not Lord. And so they would not worship both. And they paid a price. The price those Christians paid was with fear and marginalization and worshiping underground and trading in hidden symbols, and often with martyrdom. They were persecuted. Their life was a struggle, and their faith was costly. John the seer wrote this vision to give them hope in the midst of their struggle. He did not write to them tales of escaping into another world, a kind of celestial beach somewhere or a spa in the heavens. Instead, he imagined their world put right, the world in which they lived, the city where they wept and where they ached. He imagined that it was transformed by the power and the presence of Almighty God. Notice in this vision of John, those on earth don't go up to heaven. Heaven comes down to earth. John said, "Now I saw the New Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down out of heaven as a bride adorned for her husband." God's power and presence comes down to dwell in the midst of our real lives, to transform and put right our world. That's the Christian hope. John is not a peddler of escapism, but he is a prophet of hope, of what happens when God gets involved, of how earth can be renewed into a new heaven. If our imagination of heaven is fueled by John's vision, then our slice of heaven is not a vision of escaping this life for a quieter place. It's a vision of this life healed and made right. There's a road that we sometimes drive on out in Haywood County that you would have a hard time finding it even if I gave you directions. And on that road, there's a little log cabin that sits off in the woods. You can barely see the logs and the stone chimney that comes up. And out at the driveway, somebody has put a sign that was carved in wood. It says this: "The McCormicks, our slice of heaven." Now, I have no idea where in the world the McCormicks live. I imagine they probably live in a suburb with barking dogs and a difficult neighborhood association and a lot of traffic. And so when they get out to this country road, this is their slice of heaven. But I could begin to wonder if you and I were to have a sign, if I could hand you a sign today and say, where would you hang this slice of heaven? Fueled by John's vision, where would you hang that sign? Where in this world? What does it look like when a refugee child has no reason to flee their home? Would you hang a sign there that says a slice of heaven? What does it look like when a young person is free to be who they are? When they can grow up without any shame about their bodies or their feelings? Would you hang a sign that said a slice of heaven? What does the world look like when Christians in Indonesia or anywhere are free to gather and worship without fear? Would you hang a sign that said a slice of heaven? What does it look like when Muslims in Palestine are free to worship and to go about their lives and their families without fear? Would you hang a sign that said a slice of heaven? What does it look like when the sea is teeming with life and there are not floating islands of plastic? Would you hang a sign that said a slice of heaven? What does it look like when the forests and the fields are healthy and renewed? The soil does not erode down the mountainside. Would you hang a sign that said a slice of heaven? What does it look like when time does not decay? When children never say goodbye to parents, and parents never say goodbye to children? Would you hang a sign that said a slice of heaven? What does it look like when you never have to say goodbye to your spouse? Would you hang a sign there, a slice of heaven? God's dream, begun in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is of a renewed creation. It's a dream that teaches us how to dream, a dream that tells us the truth of the world, the way things are meant to be. It's a dream that helps to point our compass and teach us how to hope and what to work for and how to pray and where to hang our sign. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.